Enjoy your lunch, but I'm going to go ahead and get the program rolling. All of our speakers today are accustomed to speaking over the sound of people eating and clinking glasses and things like that, so that's perfectly okay. Again, I'm Tom Giovanetti. I'm the president of the Institute for Policy Innovation. We are a 35-year-old conservative free market public policy organization based in Dallas. We're delighted to be hosting these events. Part of our mission, of course, is to help people become better citizens by being fully informed on the issues of the day. And so today's program is a great example of that. I earlier thanked the Sumner's Foundation for sponsoring these luncheons. It is also their mission to help people become better citizens so that they can be informed about issues, so that they can be better, more informed citizens. And so if you don't know anything about the Sumner's Foundation, I would urge you to go to their website. Check them out, find out more about the organization. They support a number of excellent programs and excellent organizations. And unlike a lot of foundations, they have not gotten distracted from their mission over the years. They are really laser focused on encouraging good citizenship and informed citizenry. So go find out more about them if you don't already know about them. If you'd like to know more about IPI, of course, that would be great too. So you could go to our website at ipi.org. Where you can find a lot of information about the research that we do, the events that we do, the new content that we produce, et cetera, et cetera. We have a couple of podcasts that we do that I'm particularly proud of, so you could go there and you can subscribe to our podcast, and we would really appreciate that. We have a great program today, but before I introduce our moderator and speakers, I want to recognize our folks from Founders Classical Academy today. We really appreciate you being here. My son graduated from Founders, so we're really pleased to have a relationship with the school. And I want to note that the Dallas Morning News just this week recognized Founders Classical Academy as the best charter school in the DFW area. So congratulations to all of you. On the issue of does big tech need more regulation, I'm just betting if we just threw that out for a poll, probably 85% of people would say, heck yes, okay? And it's very interesting because, technology used to be just like a thing. It was like this thing over here in a silo, whereas today technology has become part of everything. It's become part of everything that we do. It's infused throughout the economy. It's infused throughout our lives, the way we make restaurant reservations, the way we purchase our consumer goods, the way we learn our news, the way we connect with each other, the way we develop new communities of interest. I mean, if you're like a guy in a small town who's like madly insane about Japanese maples, you can now get connected to a bunch of other people around the world who are really interested in Japanese maples, or fly fishing, or quilting, or whatever your interest is. So technology's become a part of our world, so I guess it's no wonder that people are developing opinions about it. You probably are aware that there's a number of areas where the technology regulation topic has come up. There's concern about the impact of social media on young people and their emotional development. There's concern about the impact of social media on our political discourse. Does it make our political discourse more harsh and more extreme and more polarized? There's concerns just in general about the content moderation policies that some of our social media platforms make. Both folks on the left and folks on the right are convinced that Facebook discriminates against them. Folks on the right have been definitely convinced that Twitter discriminates them, and now folks on the left think Twitter's discriminating against them. And then you have companies like Amazon and Google and Microsoft who have developed this enormous benefit to consumers, yet somehow like everybody's mad at them. I mean, I love being able to sit at home in my underwear on the couch and order stuff from Amazon and have it show up the next morning. I think that's amazing. But there are folks who are concerned that that's too much power for one company to have. So there's a lot of these issues swirling around, and we want to try to talk about some of those today. There have been a lot of regulatory proposals that have been attempted and are currently being attempted. State of Texas passed a law trying to regulate social media companies. There are child online safety bills in various states and also the federal government. Right now, the Biden administration is pursuing aggressive Federal Trade Commission investigations and lawsuits against companies like Amazon and Google. A bunch of states are also going after Google, saying that they're too big and have too much power. So there's a lot of debate, and there's a lot of churn going in this area. And so we at the Institute for Policy Innovation are always very concerned about the proposed solution being worse than the perceived problem. And I think that's one theme that will probably come out in today's discussion, that you got to be careful that the solution is not worse than the problem. But of course, we wanted to make sure that there were several perspectives that were presented on this topic, and so that's what we're planning to do today. So I'm going to go ahead and ask our speakers to go ahead and come up and join us on the platform. Our moderator today is going to be Bartlett Cleland. Bartlett is a long-term affiliate with the Institute for Policy Innovation. He's executive director of the Innovation Economy Alliance and Institute, and a senior fellow with IPI. We're really delighted to have Representative Jason Saine, who's in his 7th term from North Carolina. We did attempt to get a Texas legislator, but as you may or may not know, they're kind of occupied right now in a special session. But we're thrilled to have Representative Jason Saine, who came all the way from North Carolina. He is the House Conference Chair. He also serves as Vice Chairman of the Information Technology Appropriations Committee and is a member of the FCC Intergovernmental Advisory Committee. We're delighted to have our friend Jessica Melugin here, who is just a whirlwind of tech policy analysis and publishing. Jessica shows up regularly on cable news TV shows. She's a dynamo and she's a great friend. And Jessica, we're delighted to have you here with us today. And then finally, our own Dr. Merrill Matthews. Dr. Matthews is a resident scholar at the Institute for Policy Innovation. He writes on a wide variety of topics. Dr. Matthews works on energy policy, tech policy, healthcare, and he is going to be our third panelist today. So I want to thank you all for joining us, for coming great distances in some cases. And with that, I will pull the podium back for your benefit, and then you can start the program. How about that?
That's great, although seeing me might not be of great benefit, so think wisely. Great. Yeah, we're good. So thank you, Tom, thank you, IPI, and thank everyone here for coming. I have the great privilege to be on the stage with these three, all of whom I know personally, and all of whom I have tremendous respect for. Very quickly, I don't know anyone in certainly tech policy who is as smart and as witty and quick thinking as Jessica, and that's bar none. Jason, I got to know, I think, literally the year he got appointed for his first term, and it's interesting that we connected politically. It's far more interesting to me that we connected personally, and I count him not only as one of my favorite legislators, but honestly as a friend, not a DC friend, not a political friend, but as a real friend. And then Dr. Matthews, I have had the privilege to work with for, I actually don't even want to say how long now, but he introduced me to IPI in the first place. And I have learned a great deal just listening to him and following some of his guidance in the way he thinks about policy and about what we need to accomplish in our role at IPI and as thought leaders.
I was hoping for smart and witty too.
So, and he's smart and witty. Anyway, so I am thrilled to be up here with these three. The intention today is to really just have a conversation. Each of these folks has a very different approach to these issues. And some more informed or less informed on the details, some more informed on the politics, some more informed on policy, and that is the intention. We did not want to give you a panel of just a bunch of experts saying a bunch of things to you about legal intricacies or whatnot. That's not that interesting. So hopefully you will take away real, live, useful conversation points and a greater understanding of these issues. So with that, or actually I should say one more thing. Today is, and I'm sure you're all excited, and I suspect you all have evening program planned around this, but today is the birthday, the 25th birthday of the Internet Tax Fairness Act that Congress passed, and that was to protect the internet from being rampaged by a bunch of taxes at state and local level. And we managed to protect the internet from that kind of activity for like 20 years or so, and allowed it to grow as a place for commerce and communication and whatnot, not to be torn apart by the state and local tax folks. So with that, happy birthday to the Internet Tax Act, and enjoy your parties tonight that you've organized around. So hard to know where to start this conversation, honestly, on should big tech be regulated, or about any kind of regulation or legislation on big tech or not. But we're sitting in a place that honestly has made some history on this point. And you could pick the notion, or the time frame of the notion of regulating internet, online behavior, apps, et cetera, kind of anywhere over the last 25, maybe even 30 years. But I've chosen to start with a piece of legislation that was passed here in Texas because I think it is the start of kind of the modern era of really trying to regulate the internet holistically. So in 2021, Texas passed what was called HB 20. And what I will give you the description. So that prohibits large social media platforms, it was defined in the legislation, from removing, moderating, or labeling posts made by users in the state of Texas based on their viewpoints. And this became known as the viewpoint discrimination issue and legislation, unless those things were otherwise made illegal. So there was a concern back then, I think Tom alluded to this, particularly from the right, that posts being made on Facebook was kind of front and center in this debate, whether those posts were being allowed to stay up fairly or taken down unfairly. It really caught fire on some activities on Twitter with the former president, and politicians, a lot of politicians across the country were concerned about whether their posts would be able to stay up or whether they'd be deemed, quote, too conservative for the platform to leave up under their guidelines. So Florida passed a similar law. Both of these laws were appealed through the process and now are both in front of the Supreme Court to be heard this term. So with that, would love to hear what do folks think broadly or specifically on those kind of activities. And if you want to take a shot at what you think the court will say, that's great. But then particularly I'd love to hear kind of how we got to there. And I think I'm going to start with Jason, because Jason, you're one of the people that I remember talking to first about this, and I thought you had a nicely nuanced view as compared to where some people went on this. But as a legislator, you had concerns.
Yeah, I've got concerns, and you know, and I've had to live through it, right? As a legislator, I've had my share of Twitter trolls and Facebook posts. Not as much on Facebook now, since it's not so anonymous. I mean, there's usually a picture of the individual. It could be a fake account, but you know, generally you know who's making them, right? But then you get trolls on Twitter, now X, where you'd have people that just create accounts just to troll you and to make up things, say nasty things about you. I'm a tough guy. It doesn't really bother me that much. But you know, I've also got a 15-year-old at home, and he gets to read those things as well. And that is, one, a lot of things that were just absolutely untrue. Not that he would believe them, but he's smart enough to discern what's real and what's not real. But then other people, you'd see fake accounts that look just like me. They would use my picture, use some variants of my tag of my handle, and then I had county commissioners contacting me based on something I had posted on Twitter, which I had not. So the anonymity of those things and those little games being played on X are an issue, for sure. But at the same time, I understand that, you know, in a free market, that companies are allowed to exist, and they'll either have something good that people want, or they'll go by the wayside. And at some point in time, I don't necessarily believe that it's from a legislative requirement that we have to pass new laws to tell people to behave in a civilized manner. And I think most normal people, particularly in my district, would see those things that were posted, and they understand that that can't be what's actually true. And if left out long enough, they could then discern whatever my response might be. I don't make it the habit to respond to everything, but things that needed to be responded to, certainly. But all that to say is that you get legislators who very much do not understand tech in general. When I got to the legislature in 2011, I was appointed. My background's IT. I used to run a computer shop where we repaired computers, we built networks, we built servers, white box servers, and the like. And the biggest thing I learned when I joined the legislature is that I was just the guy that was on the floor of the House that could fix their computer. And that was about the extent of what my colleagues understood as far as tech policy. So I became our first IT appropriations chairman. We spend in our state now, I think, somewhere around almost $2 billion in tech each year in a $33 billion budget. It's a lot of money, but that's more the parts and the people, right? And if you're looking to government for innovation, that's not the place to look. But sadly, I had colleagues who wanted to innovate on policy and on tech, on something that they totally did not understand. As I told you, they wanted me to Control-Alt-Delete for them to restart their computer, and now they want to write policy that would impact us all as consumers. And so, and my role at the legislature sometimes is just smacking down really bad legislation, killing bills that my colleagues, who well-intentioned, who want to do something because they felt like, well, the president was being censored on Twitter. Or they felt like, now look, I made my phone calls to Amazon and to Google and those folks that work in their public policy arenas and had my complaints because I didn't like censorship, period. And of course, I was hearing it from people in my district, but my solution was not then to go pass a lot of regulations that would impact their business model. They'll either learn from it or not. The general public will make that decision. People vote with their feet. You either got a good product or you don't, and they move. And so that's kind of been my approach to tech policy in terms of regulatory side of things, right? As long as you're not harming people, and by I mean true harm, as long as you're not harming people, as long as you're not inciting riots, I think there's some fine lines. But what we see with some of the legislation that's come forward is we really just found some people with a bone to pick who didn't like, quote unquote, big tech, and then would produce policy based on that. And they had no sense of what it would mean. They would talk about algorithms and things that they just didn't understand. They're not tech people. So you really run the risk of having some really bad policy take root. And in a like in anything else, in a crowd, enough people say it, enough people start to believe it. Before you know it, it's passed, it becomes law, and then we're stuck with it. And I think sometimes you see these things go to the courts.
So Jessica, was big tech, to pick up on a thread from Jason, was big tech picking on Republicans, conservative points of view?
I mean, I think there's certainly some anecdotal evidence to support that, but of course, as we've seen things play out, we have a lot more data points to more accurately understand what was happening, right? After the Twitter files, we know that there were a lot of government officials and organizations that were putting pressure on these social media companies. And so for me, that's really where the problem is. I'd much rather crack down on that behavior because there are some First Amendment concerns with that I think are very legitimate, rather than start treating these private networks and private companies and private platforms like they're the town square, because they're not. They're not the town square. Many of you have town squares. This is Texas. You can go out in your town square and yell your head off. And for the most part, you have every right to do that, and that's great. But when you go to Disneyland, if you start swearing and acting like a lunatic, you will be removed promptly because you are interfering with other people's experience in that space. And that's the difference between a public square and a private space. And these platforms, as much as we want, you can say it over and over again, it feels like the public square, but it's not. It's a private platform, and there's a number of them, and thanks to Elon Musk buying Twitter, now X, there's a real alternative set of content moderation rules for people who did feel, whether, justly so or not. The point is they felt discriminated against, and now they have a real alternative to that. And that's how, I think to make platforms be fair and equitable to everyone is a fool's errand, right? Because your idea of what's fair is not going to be mine, and who's the judge of that? I certainly don't want it to be the federal government, by the way. But what does work is competing senses of fair on competing platforms. So I'd rather see a bunch of different platforms moderate content however they see fit, whatever their motivations are, to keep advertisers there. I will just tell you, big corporate brands don't want to put their ads up next to speech that might be constitutionally protected, but is offensive to the vast majority of us. And these platforms don't exist to be your public square. They exist to make money, and that's with advertising. So they have an incentive that is not completely aligned with the First Amendment, right? And the First Amendment is something that says the government doesn't impinge on that. It doesn't say that Mark Zuckerberg doesn't impinge on that. And so I think we're gonna look forward to the Supreme Court sorting out a lot of that, but I always refuse to make predictions about what the Supreme Court will do. I can just be hopeful that things have changed enough. We've learned a lot more about what the problem was, and hopefully treating these platforms like their public property is not in the cards.
Dr. Matthews?
So the public square is one metaphor to use, but another metaphor is often used common carrier. And whereas we don't typically regulate the public square, we do regulate common carriers and have for decades. Telephone companies, telephone lines are common carriers. I think even freight companies are oftentimes considered common carriers. So the government has allowed some type of regulation to make sure it's fairness and so forth. Can we say that these companies are common carriers more than public squares?
I think the big distinction in the other areas that you're pointing out is that we're talking about speech, which is a very different legal matter than rate regulation of freight on a train. Even with phone lines, it's about access to those lines. It's not about the speech being carried over the lines. And because speech is so special and so important, it's the First Amendment. It's the very first one, because we don't treat it like anything else. And I'll also note that the other common carrier industries you're referring to are economic disasters, because they've been regulated like common carriers. There's huge problems with rate regulation in all of them, and obviously telecommunications heavily regulated. It's what formed the Federal Communications Commission. It was basically just AT&T and the government in bed together, sitting on the neck of any innovation for about 70 years. So certainly there is legal precedent for common carrier, but I guess I just wouldn't recommend it. And I would say that speech probably occupies a different space than freight.
Now remember, we did have great innovation with AT&T. For a while, you only got a cord that was about this long, and then like in the 80s, you could actually get a long enough cord to go around the corner. So that's right. So we did have that. So, so the court case, we don't know when the Supreme Court case, we don't know when their decision will come out, but they will be doing oral arguments this fall, I believe is the date. All right, so interesting to me, politically, in the midst of all of that going on, the energy, and I think I'm speaking mainly of legislators here, seem to shift. So these issues of free speech and how platforms should be governed. For the most part, the laws started getting struck down or otherwise stayed while there were court proceedings going on. The energy seemed to then move almost overnight to protecting children online. And so we shifted from the government telling the private sector what they're allowed to say to telling parents how to parent, is how I would frame that. This summer, we saw that the Senate moved two bills that had been around for a while, but nevertheless they started moving, dealing with online privacy for children and teens. Then in the states, we saw a ton of activity. Several laws were passed in various states, and I'm going to lump these all together for our discussion purposes, but they all took different tacks for the most part. Some focused on children's data being collected and used. Some focused on trying to limit how much time someone under 18 could be online. Various ages have been proposed. And then others set, and I believe this is Utah, set an actual time frame of the day that children could be online. Now, supporters generally say that this was necessary to mitigate the risks of kids and teens being online. So they were asserting that they knew the right amount of time for someone to be online, whatever that meant. Now, it is true that we have seen a correlation of increasing incidents of depression, suicidal thoughts, et cetera, amongst teens going on at the same time, but it's completely muddled as to what the causation is, including a recent American Psychological Association report that calls into question what the causes are for all this, and dates back to the beginning, actually in the mid-90s. So, however, there are plenty of people who say, well, even if there's any potential for harm, it's time we put guardrails in place, and that's what we're here to do as government. So as Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut kind of summarized, he says, what we're doing here is creating a duty of care that makes the social media platforms accountable for the harms they've caused, giving attorneys general and the FTC the power to bring lawsuits, ... And so that's where we are currently in the debate, and here we sit, 3 months until most states come back into session, and there are tons of pre-files. So bills, a lot of state legislators, they file bills before they actually come into session. It's called pre-file. There are already tons of pre-files around child safety online, digital parenting, whatever you'd like to call it. So I think I'll just go back to Jason. So you can pick North Carolina, you can pick the issue generally, but love to hear a point of view from the legislator.
Yeah, so it shocks me to kind of hear those kind of things because I'm a parent first, right? And that is the best job I've got in the world. My wife and I, we invest all of our time into raising our 15-year-old son. We're the parents, not Facebook, not Twitter, not the government. We're in charge of that young man. Right? Up until he turns 18 and quits paying the bills. Hopefully we get him off the payroll at that time. But at that point in time, he can make his own choices as an adult. But as an adult who oversees this child, I choose how long he's online, what he can go to, what he can't go to. Now, I'm a tech person. I understand the technology, but it's not that hard. Okay? Parents could do all this that all these bills say that they intend to do if they pay attention to their child. So looking and pointing at some private company as the fault of me not being a good parent, one, shirks my responsibility. So I don't believe in that at all. And again, I don't believe that it's the government's role to protect us from ourselves. There are going to be bad actors. There are going to be unfortunate things that happen. Again, don't know for sure what those causes may be, what may contribute to those suicide rates, what may contribute to bullying and so forth. I do know this. I think it's far more healthier for children growing up to go outside and play ball and do extracurricular activities and everything else. But I decide that as a parent, right? So I think that is a weird space and an unfortunate space for legislators to then decide for themselves that we have run all the important bills that we need for our state, our local municipality, whatever it is. And now we must take on the role of becoming the nanny state and deciding what is good parenting and what is bad parenting for kids. And I think that's essentially the argument here, right? And so, it always shocks me that when people who profess to believe in free markets and free thought go down this road and really decide, now we must decide. In North Carolina, we had a bill, I kid you not, and the legislator's a good friend of mine, but he likes to come up with clever names, and he called it the Smack It Act, because he wanted to smack it down for those companies that weren't regulating enough. And so he came up with the acronym. I can't reverse engineer it anymore. It was silly legislation. I'm glad to say that I killed it in committee by just speaking reason. I mean, I didn't even have to have a whole lot of research as to why this was a bad idea. But I asked him, I said, where did you get this idea from? Oh, well, it's a campus group over in Chapel Hill, UNC Chapel Hill, and they brought me this bill. I said, hold on. So you took a bill from people who, one, weren't your constituents, truly. Two, he's a conservative legislator. This is a left-wing group, and you see it on both sides, by the way. Left, right, it gets real, ridiculous real quick. But he's now taken this bill, this idea, and put it into a bill, and we're seriously debating it. And it had made it through one committee prior to. And again, it comes back to we as legislators, as policymakers, must make a decision to say, you know what, it is not our role to make every choice for you as an individual. In a society such as ours in the United States, that's not our role. And so I think a lot of these things will play out eventually. Again, in a free market, in a free society, what is good will make it forward. What is bad will not make it. But to say to parents, oh, no, we're now going to shoulder that responsibility, and now we're going to put it on Mark Zuckerberg's shoulders or Elon Musk's shoulders to make sure that they're parenting your child correctly while you do whatever it is that you do, I just really don't feel like that's where we should be as a society.
So Jessica, I'm going to give you credit for something that I just remembered, and I'm not sure it's yours, and if it's not, just take credit
I'm gonna
for it.
just nod.
Yeah,
If it's good.
Because it's great
Yeah.
if you didn't do it. So I recently saw a list, I don't remember where this was, of all of the online tools that are available to
actually is
parents.
me,
Was
yeah.
that you?
Yeah, that's true.
It was genius.
But I was ready to lie.
Yeah, but
But
you can lie the rest of the panel.
Okay,
That's
perfect.
cool. So just make up stuff. That's what we're here for. And it was a great physical demonstration of how much there is out there. So I thought the medium was the message almost in that case. But with that, you are also a parent. So I'm interested to hear from your point of view, from the policy side, but then as a parent, as we heard from Jason, what do you think about this, government stepping in to the parenting role?
Yeah, and again, I think that this is another case where it's not that I'm going to say there's not a problem. I'm just going to say that not every problem has a public policy solution. And these smartphones and social media apps are sort of relatively new. Not to the back of the room, who is probably listening to me like I'm a dinosaur talking about smartphones. And they have a very different relationship with those phones than those of us who aren't native users.
Tell them about you used to have a BlackBerry. They'll love it.
I did used to. I missed that keyboard. But we all have to learn, and sometimes I think they do a better job of when to put the phone down and how much is enough and what's healthy and what's not, and we're all learning that. And as a parent, I have rules in my house about that, and I also try to police myself to be a good example with my phone as well. So on a personal level, I just think we're on a learning curve here, but let's keep learning. We can get better at this. And from a policy standpoint, the question becomes there's never a silver bullet answer to this. It sounds great to say we're going to limit this so it's not too much. But what does that involve? In order for for me to prove that I'm not a kid and that I can be on social media, I have to upload a government ID. So what are we giving away in terms of privacy and some fluidity of freedom of speech in order to make sure, we know the age of everyone who's on a social media platform? There's no way to prove someone's a kid and those rules apply to them without proving I'm not a kid and they don't apply to me. So what you've just legislated is government ID or biofacial scanning, or pick your sort of concerning way that you prove you're an adult and not a kid. Because nothing's for free, right? There's always trade-offs. And I just agree that I'd rather see that locus of power be with parents, because every kid's different, right? Some people who are 40 years old should not be on social media, and some people who are 12 can kind of handle it, right? And everyone's different, and that's going to change at different times, and there's no getting around parenting and being in touch with your kids and having these conversations with your kids and checking in with them and being involved and making individual decisions with them. And the other thing is, you can't just keep them off of social media until they're 18 and then be like, okay, go get a job in the world we live in, because that's not setting them up for success. And as parents, it's just another thing on the list. We need to teach them how to be good users of these tools, to use them wisely and not in a way that is harmful. And there's just not a great shortcut around that, I'm afraid.
Dr. Matthews, you, like me, raised 2 girls.
I did.
And so what are your thoughts here?
Well, Jessica said there's no getting around parenting. But let's be honest, there are a lot of parents who don't parent. And what I'm wondering is, how do you deal with the people who are the parents aren't taking the right role of being parents? They're debating right now in the state legislature the school choice legislation. You make this available not because the people at the charter school here are one of the best schools around. I doubt any of you will take advantage of that. But if you're in an inner city school that's been failing, those parents would want to take advantage of that. And so my point being is, I understand the role of parents there, but what do we do about the kids who have failed parents? How do we make sure that we take care of them?
And I think that's always going to be the debate, right? I mean, but my role as a legislator is not to guarantee your success. It's to guarantee your opportunity. So when we talk about opportunity scholarships, or we talk about charter schools, or opportunity out there, and my kid goes to a charter school, so we practice school choice. But the reality is we can't save everybody. And I've often had ministers come to my office on various social issues at the legislature. And I grew up an Episcopalian, judge me if you will. We believe in God 4 times a year. That's a joke. It's okay. You can laugh. But we grew up a little differently about how we think about things. However, we do believe in protecting children for sure. We want to protect them from abusers. But we also sometimes can't even protect kids against bad parents, right? And sometimes there's just bad parents. And they don't get it right. And so, I don't know that there is a silver bullet to what Jessica said. I don't think there's any silver bullet out there that will help those problems. There are other things we can do as a society, but that comes from teaching people better civility, better understanding of their environment, and quite frankly, helping out their economic status versus whether or not we go and try to be the parent looking over the shoulder for these absent parents. I don't know that there is an easy answer to that, but I also don't want, and to your point, Jessica, my kid's a very smart kid. He can be very discerning. He can go online. He knows where pitfalls are. He's not going in those. I think we've taught him well. He's had good schooling. He's had all those things and all those opportunities. So I wouldn't want to limit his ability. I hope he goes and becomes he's already got a YouTube channel, loves sports, would love for him to be a broadcaster or something like that. But he'd have to know the social media skills to get there. And he starts way ahead of everybody else if he has that ability to freely go and do under the tutelage of parents that pay attention to what he's doing. So I just don't know what that answer is, but I'm not sure. And what I told the preacher sitting in my office that day, I said, your job is to save souls. That's not mine. Mine is to make sure that people can easily operate in a free society and be respectful to each other and then work through their normal lives. And so maybe it's that I view my role differently than some of these other legislators, but that's how I see the world.
Just one very quick in response. There is a bill that just passed in the Florida legislature where they have designed or told the school districts to design curriculum for educating kids about responsible online behavior. And I think that that's something that might make sense. That still, it's up to you and your parents what happens, but that's a good education for kids who might not be enjoying a checked-in parent at home. So I think that's one soft-handed solution.
I'm forgetting right now, but did Virginia pass something like that as well? Maybe they're considering it. Alrighty. Okay, so Jessica, I want to pick up on something you mentioned earlier, and what a lot of us started referring to as jawboning, and that is to the extent that this is about government, calling our friends in, by the way, I hate the phrase big tech because it means nothing. And if it means anything, it means the hundreds of billions of dollar industries from small software companies to large hardware providers in this country. So don't ever use big tech. Social media is a different story. Social media is a sort of software. This is a question about government talking to social media companies or other companies that have platforms where opinions are expressed and leaning on them to act or not act in a certain manner. So there is a lawsuit that came out of Missouri v. Bonta, and it also includes Louisiana, I believe, on the side of Missouri. And the lawsuit alleges that President Joe Biden and his administration were, quote, working with social media giants such as Meta, Twitter, and YouTube to censor and suppress free speech, including truthful information related to COVID-19, election integrity, and other topics under the guise of combating misinformation, quote unquote. So we all know how these conversations go. It is more of a leaning on these companies kind of situation. Most companies, if folks don't know, most big companies do a whole lot of business with government, but they also cooperate with government. And so the notion of those relationships being harmed is a real threat to the companies. But Jessica, you mentioned this jawboning idea earlier. Do you have some more thoughts on what you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I think because the scale of social media is still, like I said, relatively new to us. We're gonna see this worked out in conversations like we're having today, in change behavior, and also in the courts, right? Common law and precedent is going to move along and consider these questions. So even though the idea of job owning is not new, it is certainly new in this context, right? The power of social media to have this influence. And the Fifth Circuit came out and really widened what had been the precedent for what qualifies as job owning, really took it all the way and said, nobody talks to anyone. If you're in the administration, you don't talk to these companies. I mean, it was a really broad, probably overly broad decision that might get mitigated as it moves up the ranks here. But I think you have to understand that in the backdrop of the government being so powerful and doing so many things, and that's government contracts with these companies, cloud computing, all that stuff, and also Section 230, which I won't bore you with, but we'll just say, is a liability shield for these companies that allows them to operate as they do. With Section 230 being under attack and being threatened to be removed, that could easily feel like a situation where when whoever at HHS calls you up at Facebook or Instagram or Twitter and says, hey, it'd be really cool if you took down this post this person put up, it would be easy to feel like you didn't really have a choice and that there would be a lot to lose if you didn't cooperate. And I think for courts to find a reliable standard that people can operate under that says you can communicate with them, you can ask them, but you can't pressure them is really challenging and difficult, but I think it's really important because you do want communication between these companies and the government. I will tell you that big social media platforms report thousands, tens of thousands of crimes a day to law enforcement. You want a lot of those conversations to keep happening, right? There has to be coordination. But you certainly don't want your government running around the First Amendment, kind of a workaround there and suppressing people's third-party posts because it doesn't align with their agenda. Whether that agenda is the best of intentions during a health emergency or politically charged with election questions, it doesn't matter. We still have to have those safeguards on, and they're important, but they haven't been worked out yet. We're in the process. Like that case, we're watching how we're going to go forward and deal with this. It's going to be really interesting, and it's going to be very impactful to all our lives.
Jason, thoughts on government leaning on these companies to cooperate?
Yeah, so I have a kind of interesting viewpoint on that. From where I sit as a legislator, I'm one of 170 in the North Carolina House and Senate, one out of 120 in the North Carolina House. I may have exactly that thing that you believe, and we connect, 100% of us here in the room, all of us. But you're only a fraction of the people in my district. And I tell people who sometimes don't like the outcome of legislation, who don't like what our governor did or what our Senate did or whatever, look, I would love nothing more to be your dictator for a day. But about one day is all it will take, and our 100% will go down to 90%. It could go as low as 60%, or you could end up really hating me. That's not how our discourse is set up. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. You get to have a conversation about it, and that conversation continues. I don't believe that I should call Twitter and say, hey, I didn't like that post about Mrs. Smith that lives down the block, because truth of the matter is she's a bit nosy and she puts her nose in her neighbor's business, but she makes a mean casserole and she brings it to me every Wednesday, and so I got to look out for it, right? I mean, that's essentially what we could end up doing. Should the government be involved in saying, well, look, this post here is probably going to incite a riot, and one, it's false, and two, it's all these things. Maybe it's a good idea to take it down, but I don't know that should be really more transparent than anything, and I don't know that even still, that's the risk we run in a free society, right? And that's just part of it. We ask when we talk about, educating people on civility and how we should work in a civilized society. Those are the places I think where we address that first and foremost. People say anything on Twitter, right, or X, whatever, because if they can hide behind a keyboard and they don't actually have to put their name on it, and they can make up things, and I mean the internet's full of it, but at least discerning Americans can say, oh, well, that doesn't make sense, that's dumb, or they don't. But I have a real fear of letting government officials, even if it were me, make those decisions and to lean on those content providers in the private sector. This is not official government statements. The only place it gets muddy is when the government does, you mentioned the Twitter files, when you read those things that happen, then we run into a really dangerous place. And I don't think it's the responsibility of the government to be doing that. I don't think it's healthy. I think those are the safeguards we need versus some other means of doing that.
So note to self, if I ever have business in North Carolina, bring a casserole. Got it. Dr. Matthews.
So the Twitter files that were released gave us an insight into the notion that the government was leaning fairly hard on some of the social media companies. And the issue of, well, you've got to be careful about that. Well, they don't do this in North Carolina, I'm sure. But in Washington, you could have a member of the administration go by to one of the companies and talking to somebody about, you need to pull this down, we don't like this, you need to pull this down. Well, we really can't do that. Oh, I understand. Isn't that merger you're having with this company over here up for debate or consideration? Be a shame if the Federal Trade Commission came in and said, no, we need to look at this, and it may be a couple of years of lawsuits and millions of dollars in fines or something like that. It'd be a shame if that happened, wouldn't it be? But I'm not saying anything about that, but it would be a shame. We'll talk to you soon. And that kind of leaning on is not direct, it's indirect, but it gives the person a sense of, we need to play ball with this group or they're going to make our lives very difficult.
Well, interesting. You just plucked at where I wanted to go next, at the themes. So we've talked a lot about big government. There are certainly those people out there who think technology has gotten pretty big itself. So much so that the aforementioned FTC has been very active along with DOJ, as well as folks on the Hill. So there have been any number of proposals for changing the antitrust law to be able to go after big companies. And I should say, I'm going to keep saying, emphasize big, because that seems to be the thing these days. We just hate big because for big's sake. No one really describes to you what big is, just it's bad, and they never describe the harms. FTC has any number of actions underway against Google, against Amazon. The FTC and states, I guess it's true in Google's case too, states attorneys general have brought actions, different actions in both, but all with the intent of, quote, breaking them up, whatever that would mean at the end of the day. Are these folks right? Technology certainly is influential. It certainly is pervasive. Are we in a situation where tech is just too big? Does it need government to break it up?
So I'll take a stab at it first. I always say that technology is like, you're trying to keep up with technology, particularly if you're state government, is like trying to train a BB gun on a moving jet. You'll never hit that target. So I think when government believes it's their role to regulate, quote unquote, big tech, they'll miss it altogether. I know most of the younger folks in this room have probably never even heard of a thing called MySpace, right? It's really cool. You could play music on your profile, and it was like a precursor to Facebook. And I know you're all probably sitting there going, Facebook, that's what the old people use, right? And it's right, it's what we use. But I just turned 50 last weekend. But
Happy
we
birthday.
could, thank you, sir. We could never keep up with that as a government, right? So whatever we do when we're playing whack-a-mole and going, oh, we're going to, address this technology right here today. Maybe it's X, maybe it is Facebook, whatever. Maybe it's Snapchat, Instagram, whatever it is. Whatever happens next is already in development, it's already happening, and it's going to be the next hot thing, and whatever law that we write or dictate that we put down addressing that thing that we thought today was that thing we had to address will not even come close to touching whatever the new thing is, And that is probably the biggest problem at all. We can pat ourselves on the back and think we solved a problem. New problems will arise because we can never catch that jet. It's just going to keep moving, it's going to keep accelerating, and that's the nature of technology. So I think a better approach to that is making sure that we've got some safeguards, some guidelines, some things that make sense that can apply universally across how we govern and how we address these things, and then go from there. Because I think it's naive to believe that anyone sitting in this room right now knows what the next latest, greatest social media technology is going to be. But it's coming. It's being developed right now. It might be released tomorrow. We don't know. So trying to keep up with those laws or keep up with those problems are very difficult to then put into law.
Dr. Matthews, let me go to you next on this, because you actually raised this question yesterday as we were talking. So tech too big?
Tech is very big, and of course we as a country have tended to sort of push away against monopolies, and people will try to take tech and say it is a monopoly now, some of the major companies out there, and so there's no real competition. There may be competition alluded to or theoretically, but there's no real competition. But interestingly, what's happened now is you've had this split. Most of the things IPI works on generally split among free market people and those who aren't. In this case, you have liberals who are very critical of big tech because they think it doesn't censor speech enough, and conservatives who are critical of big tech because they think it censors it way too much. And how do you find some kind of balance there? And I don't have a good answer for that.
Jessica, I know I've heard you on panels talk about this exact issue. So I know you have great thoughts. Share those.
Yeah, I just very briefly, because it's a big lunch and I don't want anyone napping, but very briefly, the little background here is that U.S. antitrust law for the last 40 years has operated with this thing at the heart of it, which is consumer welfare. So basically the law has said, if consumers aren't being hurt, we're cool. If they're getting new products, if the prices aren't going up where they shouldn't, we're good. There's no problem. What's happening now with the suits against big tech and more generally at these agencies is that they're trying to get rid of that as a standard and instead interject a whole bunch of other goals. Like, well, how are the lesser competitors doing? Well, that sounds nice, but the problem with that is the solution when you start protecting lesser competitors is you end up hurting consumers. So the easy example I can get is you're an artisan bread maker and you go to the government and you say, this Wonder Bread is killing me. It's half the price, it's distributed everywhere, and I cannot sell my $9 bread. And the FTC says, that is a heartbreaker. Let us get involved. So how does the FTC fix that? They make Wonder Bread $9. That's how they fix it. And that's where you can only serve one master. So if antitrust law stops serving consumers and starts serving competitors, we're kind of all the ones that pay the price, and that's what's unfortunate. And with the big tech cases you see, there's just not consumer harm. They might make you uncomfortable because they're big, you might not agree with what you perceive their politics to be, but their price is usually zero. And they're making new stuff you use and enjoy all the time. So I think that's, if I can leave you with an idea in your head of how to evaluate all this stuff, it's how are consumers doing? Because we're all consumers, right? We're not all the Wonder Bread competitors and we're not all Wonder Bread, but we're all consumers. So that's a real equitable way of, and that's what we've been doing. But that's sort of the tradition that's under attack right now in DC.
So let me ask, Jessica, let me ask you this question. How do we know that that we as consumers aren't being harmed? I agree, Amazon, Google do a great job, get things to us cheap or free. I may have to look at a few ads or something like that. But if a small company starts up and it's trying to challenge it, we know one of the things, a lot of the companies start up hoping they get bought out by the big companies. If that company had a better product and maybe it was able to expand a little bit, maybe I would have another option that was lower price or more choice or something. So how do you address the issue of the large companies buying up the small companies, which both of them want to do, but I as a consumer, do I know if it may have been better if that company had not been bought up?
Yeah, that's a legitimate question, I think. And as you were saying, a lot of the reason these little companies get started is they go into venture capital meetings, and as part of your pitch, you say, here's the big guys who might buy me in 6 months. So they're not victims, by the way. And those founders go back and start new things and start new things. And it's sort of a myth that every little company that gets bought up gets, squished and put in a locked drawer over at Google, right? Usually they just integrate those products, or they want the people who've worked on them to help it. So you're still getting some consumer benefit into the market. But one way to look at it is saying, are there barriers to entry? And I think if you look at when this big tech stuff started, and since then, the rise of TikTok that didn't even exist when Instagram was purchased by Facebook, that TikTok is #1 now, shows you there probably isn't much of a barrier to entry in social media platforms. And the rise of Zoom as well is a great example. I think, 6 people were using Zoom before the pandemic, and then all of us. We can't get away from it now. So I think you have to look at that and say, are there new entrants? Are there new products? That's a legitimate concern. I just don't think we're there yet where we can say we're stuck with the same old products quite yet.
The antitrust stuff fascinates me, not least because I have to wonder in some of those cases, let's talk about search very quickly. Google owns search essentially, so much so that we call it Googling. We don't call it search. Yeah. And yet they've put tons of resources into that. So they've earned that position as the companies that may choose not to promote and advertise and spend all the money to go around to trade shows, et cetera, to get their product out there. So I think it's an incredibly fascinating area that's so fact-based. But let me, with the few minutes we have left, let's turn to a current hot issue that we talked about pre-files earlier. It's also attracting a ton of attention in legislatures across the country in pre-file, and that is generative AI. You would have heard of this probably most prominently through ChatGPT, but after that we quickly had Bard and a couple other products out there. And I refer to it basically as an advance in machine learning. So AI is essentially software, or it is software, that can learn patterns of information. So you can think about language or pictures, et cetera, and using those patterns from existing data and then new data, it makes predictions on what should be next. So for example, how would I finish the sentence? It would fill it in, right? So, and you're used to that and have been using that for a long time. Quick data point. Before this current wave of doom, which it seems to be the only way we hear about AI these days, in April of 2022, so about a year before ChatGPT burst onto the scene, 70% of workers indicated that they wanted to use AI for their jobs. 70%. And when CIOs, Chief Information Officers, were surveyed in 2019, 37% reported their organizations were already using AI. 2019. And here we are today. So with that, I think I'll ask a simple question. I'll start with Jessica, and I'm going to riff off of a panel you're doing, I think, next week, which is it all doom and gloom? Is this the end of everything?
Just living that panel lifestyle.
Absolutely.
Well, like all technologies, there's gloomy possibilities, and in terms of the specific concern about, is it going to replace people's jobs? That's a real concern, and that's a reality that we face all the time, right? There's always this creative destruction of people's jobs, and I don't say that to be dismissive of it, because it's a very difficult situation when it's your job that's replaced. But that's also, we're capitalists, and that's what happens. And we have to acknowledge that that's going to be a part of this. But what is also going to be a part of this is a lot of people's jobs improving in quality enormously. That the most kind of boring, redundant parts of your job might be able to be handed over to AI. What's also going to happen is enormous benefits in terms of energy efficiency, medical progress. People's lives will be improved and saved because of AI. I just think you have to keep those risks and rewards in proportion, and I think handing the reins to a bunch of US senators who I promise you couldn't describe to you AI if you asked them on the street, is a bad idea because there's such an upside. But I'll just say, it's nothing normal to have, it's nothing unusual to have anxiety about this. There's a great, you'll remember the website about all the new inventions that come and all the commensurate media coverage of the panic. And my favorite is the bicycle. There's a New York Times article about how the bicycle is just gonna be the end of us. The kids are gonna be on the bicycles all the time. They're not gonna read anymore. They're not gonna work, they're not gonna do anything, and it's just gonna upend society. And I do feel a lot of dislike towards bicycles because I drive into Washington, D.C., but the point is, it's normal to have angst with new things, and we do a really good job as human beings, and particularly in a free market society, of mitigating those problems, adapting to the upsides, and taking full advantage of that. And I think AI is a very big deal, but I don't think it's anything new under the sun in terms of there's going to be problems. There's going to be need of probably new legislation. Common law will have to sort this out too. But we can handle it. We handle all of it. There's bumps at the economic frontier, but it doesn't mean you shut down the frontier.
Dr. Matthews, you want to do any quick comment before I let Jason wrap it up?
I'd go to Jason.
Okay.
Well, so, adapt and adopt, or adopt and adapt. We will do both, right? I think back a bill that I ran in 2015, 2016 in North Carolina, all because I had to go to the DMV and renew my license and spend 3 hours of my day in one of the worst places to put someone who's got a short attention span, at the DMV waiting, just simply waiting and watching these nice folks ignore me for 3 hours to finally allow me that opportunity to give the government my money with a clean driving record to take a new picture and give me that little card. 3 hours. My time's important. I'm sitting back and I'm going, there's got to be a solution to this. I don't care who loses their job, right? I do, but at the time, if you'd have asked me that afternoon, I really didn't care. But what it led to was us adopting a chat bot that allows you to go, if you're a citizen in North Carolina, you've got a clean driving record, you go online, you put in your information, I give the government my $1, and I give them an extra $3 just to process it that way, so I don't have to go and sit in line at the DMV. Now, what it also allows us to do as state government is then to rearrange those resources, take that person that would have normally just sit there and looked at me for 3 hours and say, let's put you in a new opportunity, right? Let's let you do something better than that waste of your time and their time, and do something that helps move the state forward versus let's doing this process. So I think of it that way, right? And there will be disruption. There will be people whose jobs change, or who we're helping them find that next opportunity. So I see it a little differently. It's the way I look at it when during 2008, I lost my job, and because for no fault of my own, except the company had to downsize. Had I not had that happen to me, I'd never made it to the legislature, right? So there's a new opportunity. One door closed, a new one opened. I think if we look at it that way, and I think Americans in general are optimists. I think if we look at this, yes, there will be some downsides, but if we take it and embrace it and do it the right way, and again, I think free markets help decide that, what is the right way and what's not. I'm not thinking about killer robots, because hey, spoiler alert, they already exist. But if you're responsible as a society, and you're putting in, you're using these tools that can help us then move society forward, I think that is the real idea behind why we should look to adopt and adapt to it and make it work for us. I wrote a speech on the House floor this year. I didn't, ChatGPT did, but it was only a great speech, one, because I told it, please mimic, in the words of Representative Jason Saine, these data points. But the data points were there, right? The data points were good. I gave the machine the data points, and it wrote me, and I gave it the time frame to do it, because you got to know how to speak, and it apparently figured it out. And it figured it out, and I had a nice speech, and only had changed like 5 words, right? But it was all in things that I had done as a human being first, by using the machine. It made my life a lot easier than me sitting there for 4 hours trying to write out that speech for a floor speech that no one was going to listen to, right? So there were a couple that listened. But those type of opportunities for us, if my child can be a better driver because we've put in artificial intelligence into the car that he's driving and he can avoid a wreck because the AI has calculated at lightning speed what's happening up ahead and can then control that environment, I think that is far greater win than what's happening today. So I think there's opportunity there. We just need to be careful, like with anything else.
So, thank all three of you, robotic, AI-infused panelists. I think the audience has been completely confused. They think that you guys were real. It's fantastic. So this has been a successful experiment. So, in all seriousness, thank you to all three of you. I know time is short and precious. Jason, I know time is particularly short for you to get to the airport, but thank you for spending some time with us. And the audience, thank you for spending your time with IPI. Join me in thanking our panelists.